Recently, a person who goes by the handle BionicDance did a video titled A-Theism, criticizing my video, The Dishonesty of Defining Atheism as a Lack of Belief. A number of people have asked me to respond to it, and this video is that response.
A response that, if I want to be charitable, is rather chowder-headed since it misconstrues a lot of the points I made. If I wanted to be less charitable, I'd call it dishonest, since it attempts to dissect my points while omitting extremely relevant parts of those points as if they had nothing to do with the argument. Let's do this. Greetings, fellow space travelers. BionicDance here. If you recall, in my last video I addressed a guy who goes by missing the mark, an act of which he does a very fine job. In fact, let's have a look at one of his very first examples of this. Today we're dealing with a fellow who goes by the rather unfortunate moniker of missing the mark.
First, right in the intro to my video, I tell you that my name is Christopher. I go by the moniker Christopher. This show is called Missing the Mark.
Uh-huh. And yet, people on the internet are often known by the names they've chosen as their identifier, whether it's a video game or Skype or YouTube. Like it or not, it's your YouTube name, so people are gonna know you as Missing the Mark. And that's a pretty horrible name to choose if you want to be taken seriously. But let's couple that with this.
Recently, a person who goes by the handle BionicDance.
Today we're dealing with a fellow who goes by the rather unfortunate moniker of missing the mark.
The handle BionicDance.
Moniker of missing the mark.
BionicDance.
Missing the mark.
BionicDance.
Missing the mark. So apparently I'm BionicDance, but you're not missing the mark. Oh, the irony.
She is to some degree agreeing with the main contention of my video, that the purpose of defining atheism as a lack of belief is not accuracy but rhetorical advantage.
And this is a case of either misconstruing what I've said or deliberately ignoring relevant parts, because I go on to say that the theist preferred definition of atheist is designed to box atheists into a very narrow position, while the atheist preferred definition is much more broad, allowing for nuance, allowing for those who don't believe in any gods some leeway to expand upon saying they're atheist by adding more nuance after declaring their position of non-belief, or even as a way of describing the lack of belief they see in others. The controversy here, the linguistic trickery, is coming from the theist side, as they're trying to force a position on atheists, and atheists aren't putting up with it. The attempt to gain a more advantageous linguistic position shouldn't automatically imply malicious or dishonest intent.
New definitions which disagree with old definitions tend to make understanding difficult.
Your cognitive inadequacies and stick-in-the-mud mentality are not my concern, especially not when the new definition is, in fact, new and improved. It actually aids understanding, provided you're honest enough to care about other people's actual position.
That doesn't make new definitions inherently bad, but they should only be adopted for good reasons.
Like, oh, I don't know, actually allowing people to accurately describe certain positions on issues. Just as an example.
Most words that denote a lack in English are rather negative. Ignorance, which is a lack of knowledge. Weakness, which is a lack of strength. Dishonesty, which is a lack of honesty.
Oh, the irony of that last example. The only one of these that actually denotes a lack of something is ignorance. The other two cover far more ground than a simple lack. They're not simply the absence of something, but the opposite, or even active opposition to its opposite. Furthermore, that words which describe a lack of absence are often construed as negative is irrelevant. Your emotional reaction to a word has no bearing on its meaning.
There is no word for being not racist.
Not etymologically speaking, no. But that doesn't mean we couldn't build one out of word fragments if we felt the need. There are plenty of online sources to look up various prefixes and suffixes. They're a bit awkward, but the first to suggest themselves are racian or pro-race. Furthermore, this example only serves to illustrate my own point, which is that what we need is a broad term that describes tolerance, look at the various forms tolerance can come in, and then also look at its opposite, intolerance. To use racism as an example is like using atheism to only mean denial of God's existing when the topic is actually far more broad.
Much later on, BionicDance says,
Many people liken it to not being a stamp collector. All I have to do to be a non-stamp collector is to not collect stamps. Full stop. Nothing else is required. And it's the same with being an atheist and belief in gods.
And if atheists didn't hold conferences and didn't have YouTube channels about atheism and so forth, this might be plausible.
And if stamp collectors were going around making royal nuisances of themselves, those who didn't collect stamps would probably be having conferences too. Atheist activism is more a form of self-defense than anything else. If theists could share and play nicely with the other kids, atheists would probably just roll their eyes at ridiculous religious beliefs and go on with their lives, much the way someone might if, to them, stamp collecting seemed pointless. I know I would. And pointing to the behavior of some atheists does not define all of atheism, any more than theists being assholes in the name of their beliefs means that all theists are pricks thanks to their dogma and faith. Again, atheism is a broad topic, and you're trying to narrow it down to only one or two forms it may come in.
If you take the definition of atheism seriously, then there can't be an atheism-theism debate.
That would be true if atheism meant what you think it does, but the truth is you've rather badly misconstrued the point of that definition, and seem quite unwilling to listen to clarification, since you've obviously missed the point from my last video. Is that you being a chowderhead, or you being dishonest? No, really. Which is it?
In a debate, each side must argue for a contrary position. If atheism is merely a lack of a belief, then it can't be argued for.
So obviously the people who are in a debate are people for whom belief in a God is absent for rather specific reasons that can be argued for. They're a certain kind of atheist. This seems to be the point you're missing, whether intentionally or due to cognitive deficiency. Let's break this down using a Venn diagram. Here is everybody who has no belief in any gods for whatever reason. It is a very broad bubble that covers a lot of ground. Within it are the people who don't believe because they don't give a shit, and the people who've never heard of the concept. Here are the people who don't believe because theists have failed to be convincing, and those for whom the case was made in a way that was full of holes and contradictions, and so on, and so forth, with a double-wide buttload of reasons for having no belief. You see, as I said in the last video, you're trying to have one word say too much, when it's actually a word that covers tons of ground, and requires other words in addition to clarify and narrow the topic down to what you're trying to have a single word say. This should be a very simple idea that only has to be made once, and I have to ask again whether you're being dishonest or clueless.
If the two sides of a debate are, there is a God, and I don't have a belief in a God, those aren't contrary positions.
No, they're not. But you're definitely being dishonest here, because theism is not the position that there is a God, but rather the belief that there is a God. The two positions are believing and not believing. Now, if we're going to have a debate between strong theists and atheists, or Gnostic theists and atheists, now we've described the kind of debate you're probably expecting to have. But you see, we need those adjectives to describe the nuance, to say what kind of atheists and theists we're talking about. It's like you're expecting the term music to only mean country, ignoring rock, rap, baroque, and every other flavor of music. It's like movies to you only refers to documentaries, and to Hades with sci-fi, action, and romantic comedies. It's like color can only mean chartreuse, and to fuckery with magenta, pink, and burnt umber. That's what you're trying to do with the word atheism, and it denies the reality of the forms having no God belief can come in.
And consider further that if atheism is merely a lack of belief, then an atheist conference is a get-together of people who have nothing in common. What's brought them together is that they all lack the same thing.
Which means they do have something in common. They're not theists. The label of theist does not apply to them. And this is noteworthy in a world where theists seem to have so much influence on people's lives, where not having any belief, or having the wrong belief, can sometimes have dire consequences. If atheism existed purely in a vacuum, where there was no theism against which to contrast it, you might have a point, but it doesn't, and you don't.
You don't see this for any other lack. There aren't get-togethers of people whose only connection is that they don't collect stamps.
If people who collected stamps went around acting like total pricks to other people, if they had influence on the government forcing us to behave as if we were collectors, if they started wars over their collection, there might bloody well be get-togethers of people with no stamp-collecting hobby.
The people who call themselves atheists act like they have something positive in common. Here's an example.
And it is important to have the atheism definition, because atheism can come in many different styles and to many different degrees. To have a description that covers all of those bases is important in order to express one's actual opinion.
Why?
Why is it important to be able to express one's actual position? Are you seriously asking that? Because if you're seriously asking that, you need far more professional help than I can give you.
What could you possibly do with a word that collects together these radically different things?
Radically different things, you say. They all come from a single base position, not having God belief. We start there and then branch out into the apparently radical different forms that can take. The only reason to demand that they be separate is, again, to box atheists into a single position, or to separate them from each other despite that common basis, making it much easier to attack by theists.
You can group people using it, but then there's nothing to say about the group. Since the word is so broad, it includes people who are utterly unlike each other.
Irrelevant. Your personal need for the group to mean something has not a thing to do with this. You might as well be saying that baseball and gymnastics or fishing or boxing, etc. aren't sports because of how different they are from each other, and never mind whether they can fit within the same Venn diagram of, and I quote, an athletic activity requiring skill or physical prowess and often of a competitive nature. The fact is that these sports, and the different kinds of atheism, fit within a very relevant definition, would be grouped together within the same circle in a Venn diagram. You don't like it? Get the fuck over it. This is how it works.
Okay, these people all lack a belief in God. Fine. Now what?
Now we've accurately defined them. It's not the definition's responsibility to contain within it the next step you are going to take with it.
If you want to express your actual opinion, you want the most specific terms you can use, not the least specific terms. This is why theists never use the word theist. If somebody asks me what I believe, I will say that I'm Catholic. That accurately describes what I believe.
And now we're back to you wanting one word to do all of the heavy lifting. When you say you're Catholic, theist may be implied, but if we're going to be as technical as possible, Catholic would be an adjective that modifies the word theist. You are a believer in God, and you do it in the style of Catholicism, just as I am an agnostic apistivist atheist, or someone who lacks any knowledge of God's existence, does not engage in the use of faith, and therefore does not believe in any gods. You see, using those adjectives to modify atheist gives that specificity you're after, while not sacrificing the word that means having no God belief on the altar of linguistic shortcuts.
In fact, the only people who use the word theist, in my experience anyway, are atheists. And they only use it because they don't care about any of the distinctions between us.
If that is, as you say, your experience, you need to get out more, or at least join more Facebook groups. Anyway, this is getting repetitive, and the rest of his video is little more than arguing against badly misconstrued ideas of what I was getting at, coupled with self-righteous speeches, so I'm going to end this here. Until next time, fellow space travelers, this is BionicDance saying don't run on automatic. Instead, please think. Not rating and subscribing has been found to cause obesity, acne, and male pattern baldness in laboratory rats.
Yeah, whatever.
Don't let this happen to you. Be sure to rate and subscribe.